And I am your host, Brad Schmidt. Thanks for joining me this afternoon. 501-403-KRN. Holy cow, 501-403-5276. I got a little loud there, sorry. Shouting into the microphone. We haven't even started yet. We're only, 30 seconds into the show, and I'm already screaming at you. So anyway, 501-403-KRN is that phone number if you do want to join the conversation today. And we've got a lot to talk about. I want to come back to yesterday. We spent a lot of time talking about homelessness and public camping and things like that. And I got a message yesterday that came through Facebook Messenger that I missed. I didn't see it until after the show. And a person who had a disagreement with me actually made a few good points and made some how do you say it? I guess he made some points that I thought at least needed to be addressed. I think there were some things that we could maybe find some common ground on. And so we'll get into that. We'll talk a little bit about that today as we get into the show. But there's a lot more to talk about as well. Of course, the ongoing announcement and the information we're finding out about the assassination attempt against President Trump and the report on the or from Congress, from the Senate on that. So we'll talk a little bit about that today. I don't want to, again, spend a lot of time on that, not because I don't think it's important, not because I don't think it's worth talking about, but I think the fact that Dan Bongino, of course, is on for 3 hours right before I am on, his insight and his sources and his knowledge of that topic is so much more expert and professional than anything I'll ever do, just because he was a Secret Service agent. I think he served, was it 12 years, something like that? And so his knowledge, his expertise, and his understanding of that is so much better than mine. And there's just not going to be a lot that I'm going to be able to add to what he's already explained and how well he has laid out that information. And essentially, Bongino, to kind of summarize for those of you who maybe didn't get a chance to listen to what Bongino had to say, is that this is a very real threat that people within the Secret Service either failed miserably due to incompetence, or there's possibly even a mole within the Secret Service. And the failures of these individuals within this agency, if they are allowed to continue in the path of knowledge that they are currently going down, they're going to get Donald Trump killed. And he even hinted at maybe that's exactly what they want. And that in and of itself should concern you. That alone should concern you. Again, you don't have to like Donald Trump. You don't have to think Donald Trump's a great guy. You don't have to think that he's the greatest thing since sliced bread. But if the powers that be that are constantly attempting to get us into war after conflict, get us bogged down in foreign entanglements for decades at a time and spend trillions of our tax dollars, if those are the people that are saying Donald Trump must be stopped, you got to ask yourself why. And again, not because of Democrat versus Republican, not because of party against party or any of that, but look at where this military industrial complex, the military intelligence complex, look at where they have taken us over the last, say, 40 years. And as I pointed out yesterday, the things that we have seen in the various operations and projects and the ways that the United States government has lied to us and has abused us as citizens for decades upon decades. Operation Northwoods, Operation Gladio, Operation MK Ultra, the Tuskegee medical experiments. The list goes on. These various clandestine operations and the things that were crazy conspiracy theories That's just a bunch of crazy nut jobs trying to claim the government's out to get us, until documentation was revealed and FOIA requests were allowed to be honored and answered. And we found out it was all true. That the government really was spying on us. That the government actually was experimenting on black men with syphilis. We know that in many cases, those black men didn't have syphilis until the government infected them with it. We know that these things happen. And if that's the community that's trying to stop Trump, I think we at least owe it to ourselves to ask, maybe, just maybe, there's a different reason why they're trying to stop him. Not because he's a threat to democracy, not because he's a threat to national security, but because he's a threat to the powers that be who would wield tyranny and oppression over the American people. Maybe that's why they're trying to stop him. Maybe that's why they're doing everything they can, using lawfare, using character defamation, using inappropriate and illegal wiretapping of his campaign headquarters and all of the other things that are going along with it. That maybe, just maybe, we need to look at Donald Trump and go, okay, yeah, maybe he's not the most elegant guy. Maybe he says dumb stuff, and maybe he puts his foot in his mouth once in a while. But if the evil people that have done evil things for decades are trying to stop him, maybe we need to give him a look. 501-403-KRN, 501-403-5276 if you want to join the conversation. The other thing I want to get to today, I want to spend a little bit of time, because I mentioned this yesterday, or maybe it was the day before, maybe it was Monday, I don't remember. But I had mentioned this idea of personalities versus philosophies. How we oftentimes, especially in modern politics, we've fallen for the lie and the grift of the personality as opposed to standing firmly on the principles that we claim to stand for, that as conservatives, as liberty-minded individuals, as whatever, that those principles, the ideas that we should be basing our decisions on, not whether or not a politician we like said it or a politician we dislike said it, but what's the philosophy, what's the policy principle behind it. And so I want to take some time today. I'm going to break down the 6 canons of conservative thought. I know I've talked about this a lot, and many of you are maybe tired of even hearing about it, but I think it's important to address these and talk a little bit about why. We all know that overtaxation of a population is bad, but why? Why is it bad? We all know that property rights are important, that having the ability to own your own property and in part own yourself, as our libertarian friends talk about. Owning yourself is important and is essentially an issue of property rights. And so I want to talk a little bit about that today, kind of break down some of those things and really get into that and lay out that even at the end of the 4 years, if Donald Trump wins, at the end of the 4 years, when Donald Trump leaves office, finally and forever, we are not lost and without hope, because no one will ever do it like Trump. We have to find the person. We have to find the candidate. We have to find the political party. We have to find the movement that is going to move these principles of conservatism and liberty forward in the most expeditious manner possible and protect for our nation's future prosperity these ideologies of liberty and justice and truth and all of those things that we talk about in movies and Hollywood blockbusters. So 501-403-KRN, 501-403-5276 is the number. We've got a lot to get to on News Radio 102.9 KRN. Good afternoon. Welcome once again to the Schmidt Show here on News Radio 1029 KARN. I am your host, Brad Schmidt. Thanks for joining me this afternoon. 501-403-KARN, 501-403-5276 is the phone number if you want to join the conversation. One texter says this about Trump: there are a lot of people in government and now entertainment, they don't want the contents of P. Diddy or Epstein's black books getting out. Certainly, but I think that's actually a small piece of the pie. I think it's much, much deeper than that. I think the government in general has become a leviathan that is so out of control that its only purpose at this point is to continue to consume, to feed. So every policy that comes out of Washington is funneled through this filter of how will this continue to bring revenue to the United States government, to continue to fund these programs. And I'm not even sure that it's necessarily a concerted effort. I'm not even certain that it's some sort of like shadowy cabal that does everything they can to make sure and keep this group of 10 or 12 people rich. I think it's probably less specific than that, less detailed than that, but that maybe even makes it that much more sinister. So let's just talk, for example, with agriculture. The agricultural output of the United States is greater than literally every other country on the earth. I would argue, and I don't know if this is exactly true, but I would argue that it's probably likely that we produce more agriculturally in the United States than not just every other country on earth, but maybe even every other country combined. I mean, you think of the food that we produce, whether it's fruit or grains or meat, beef, pork, chicken, turkey. I mean, pick one. Certainly there are other countries that produce more of a specific kind of food, maybe more rice or more bananas or more, oranges or whatever, specific kind of food. But generally, overall, the amount of agricultural output in the United States is a stunningly high amount. Now, that being said, we also have this huge department called the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And the U.S. Department of Agriculture makes most of the decisions on the regulations for the production of agriculture within the United States. And there are corporations and farming conglomerates and associations of, wheat growers associations, corn growers associations, soybean producers, and, beef producers and pork producers, and all of these associations that know that the U.S. Department of Agriculture makes those decisions on all of these things. So a big corporate pork producing company that produces millions of pounds or, tens of millions of pounds of pork every year, they make an incredible amount of money as long as they can get the U.S. Department of Agriculture to create a set of rules and regulations in their favor. So they begin to spend a lot of money in lobbying the U.S. Department of Agriculture for a specific rule or a specific regulation on the pork industry that hamstrings all of the local family farmers or all of the other opponents or competitors of such and such a company or whatever. And so they spend, say, $100 million because they know that in the end their profit will increase by $500 million. Now you multiply that out across all of, like I said, the Wheat Growers Association, the Corn Growers Association, the Soybean Producers, the American Cattlemen's Association, and on and on the list goes. And Hormel and Tyson Chicken and every other food producer in the country doing the exact same thing for their kind of specific niche of the market. And suddenly the FDA the Department of Agriculture figures out that they get to be the sole arbiter of who becomes rich and who doesn't become rich. And so the low-level employee who is writing a report for their supervisor at the Department of Agriculture that says this thing or that thing needs to happen, they get promised a job from, Hormel or Tyson or Kellogg's or Post or whichever other food manufacturer. Hey, if you make sure your supervisor knows how important this rule is, we'll make sure and give you a job here at the company when you're ready to move on, or once we've got the rule passed, we'll provide you a job. And so it becomes incredibly corrupt very, very quickly. Now, again, you take that not just with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, but you add in the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, you add in the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, you add in the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, you add in all of these other huge federal regulatory agencies. And all of these various agencies begin to involve themselves in American life, not because it's what's best for the American, but they've been manipulated in one way or another to help a kind of niche region of their industry. And no longer are the laws and the rules and regulations what's best for we the people, but it's best for all of these kind of spider web connected agencies, because the FDA is the Food and Drug Administration, and they're working with the USDA for the Department of Agriculture and all of these other things. And it's not some like backroom secret cabal. It's just the nature of a huge, uncontrollable leviathan that its only purpose is to eat and consume resources from the American people. There's more to get to as we continue with the Schmidt Show next on News Radio 102.9 KRN. You're listening to The Schmidt Show on News Radio 1029 KARN. I'm your host, Brad Schmidt. Thanks for joining me this afternoon. 501-403-KARN, 501-403-5276. So all of those examples I gave, the FDA, the USDA, the Department of Agriculture, all of that, those are just kind of abstract ideas. I'm not talking about a specific plot or some sort of secret information that I have on those agencies, whatever, but I just understand kind of the basics of how these things kind of work. And this is the danger, the generalized danger of a large central government. It becomes so powerful that it can do anything it wants. And so then the folks with the money who are most able to influence it will influence it for their benefit and to the destruction of everyone else. And they do it all under the law, under the guise of it's for your own good. And so that's kind of where we're at with all of that. And again, when you take that and multiply it across all of these other agencies and all of these other departments, whether it's the Department of Education and the teachers unions or the Department of Labor and manufacturing organizations and companies and all of that, you see very quickly how the proverbial they becomes not just a cabal of a few influential people, but it becomes a colony of fire ants that spread out to almost imperceptible expanses that we can't even comprehend. And so that's where we're at with it. Anyway, 501-403-KARN, 501-403-5276. So what I want to come back to, like I said earlier, is I want to talk a little bit about the 6 canons of conservative thought and how we need to approach these things, the executive branch, and how we need to deal with these agencies and things like that. And to kind of transition into that, a texter says, why are you focused on one person to reform our federal government? Trump is not a panacea. He spent a lot of money we didn't have last time he was in office. I'm not focusing on Trump. None of what I just talked about was about Trump. In fact, I've spoken regularly for years that part of the problem is that the president has way too much power. The idea of the executive order that they can do all of these things without legislation, without Congress, they can call for military action in other countries without declaring war, which is a responsibility specifically of Congress, and all of these things. The executive branch has entirely too much power. And if you listen to what I just said in the first half hour of the 2 o'clock hour, and you heard that as a promotion of Trump specifically, you got to ask yourself, why are you so obsessed with Trump? Because none of that was about Trump. The only thing I said about Trump is if that leviathan of government is trying to stop him, maybe you should ask yourself why. Why is that group? Why is the intelligence community? Why is the military community? Why is the legislative lawmaking community so dead set against Donald Trump? And it's not because, Donald Trump lied about his affair with a porn star. I promise you, nobody in Washington cares about that. Nobody in Washington cares about Donald Trump having an affair with a porn star because most of them probably do it themselves. Most of them are probably engaged in some sort of extramarital affair right now in Washington, D.C., with some hooker while their wife is back in the home state in the district. Don't kid yourself for a second that any of these people are moral crusaders and that they've never said anything as bad or maybe even worse than what Donald Trump has said about women or anything else. They've just never been caught on tape doing it. Don't tell me, well, Donald Trump has enriched himself as the president by this and that and contracts and blah. nearly every congressman has gotten rich off of something that they've done in Washington, D.C. So I promise you, none of them care about Donald Trump using the office to enrich himself, which statistically speaking and mathematically provable, he hasn't. Donald Trump's net worth has declined significantly since he became the president. Donald Trump would have been much better off personally. Donald Trump would have been much more profitable and prosperous had he simply stayed out of politics and kept paying off the politicians that now claim to hate him. Donald Trump spent most of his adult career paying off politicians to get things done so he could become a billionaire in real estate development and property development and all of the other businesses he's been involved in. So I promise you, nobody in Congress cares about Donald Trump enriching himself. What they're worried about is that Donald Trump might expose them for doing exactly the things that they claim to hate him for. So this isn't about promoting Trump. This is about exposing the ant's nest that is Washington, D.C. and how interconnected I don't think the swamp is the best way to describe it. I really feel like the army ant or the fire ant nest is a better way to describe what happens in Washington, D.C. Because it all happens underground where nobody can see it, and it's all interconnected, and they're all working together. So this need to dismantle the insanely overbearing and overgrown federal government is really what's up for discussion. And as far as, like, say, the president, I think the president has entirely too much power. It really shouldn't matter all that much who we elect to be the president, because the head of the executive branch should not have the kind of power that they have. What we should be talking about is how important it is to elect our own local congressmen, our own local state senators and state representatives, and how important it is that we elect this person or that person to the city council or to the county commission or to whatever other local governing body that actually affects us in a real level. The president really shouldn't be much more than a figurehead who does kind of a rah-rah, sis-boom-bah, let's go get him and let's take care of things, and then be the commander-in-chief of the military. That's basically all the president should be. The executive order, I don't know how you get away from it. I would like to see the executive order done away with almost entirely. There are very, very few limited cases where an executive order is useful, whether that be like a disaster declaration or something like that, or whether it be the need to implement some sort of specific treaty or something like that with other nations, whatever it would be. But even that can be handled through Congress, and the treaties all have to be ratified by Congress anyway and all of that. But yeah, this idea that the president has become the most important election in the United States every 4 years is problematic. It shouldn't be that way. For one, the Congress themselves have so abdicated their authority that it has, I would argue that it has probably been the single most significant factor in leading to an out-of-control executive branch. There's very little checks and balances on the executive branch anymore. Congress doesn't tell the EPA or the ATF or the FDA or the USDA or any of these other, it doesn't tell them what to do. They just give them money and tell them to do whatever they want. Add whatever regulations and rules you want. Just so we don't have to do it, because we're a bunch of lazy bums who want to collect our expensive salaries and then get our cushy consulting jobs after we leave Congress. for $500,000 or $1 million a year or more. So anyway, there's more to get to. We got a few text messages, and I do, like I said, I want to get to the 6 canons of conservative thought. It's all coming up on News Radio 1029 KRN. Welcome back once again to the Schmidt Show here on News Radio 1029 KARN. I'm your host, Brad Schmidt. Thanks for joining me this afternoon. 501-403-KARN, 501-403-5276. One texter says this: now might be a good time to mention Congress has a sexual fund to bail them out. Right, exactly, right? There's a slush fund in Congress to pay off essentially settlements for congressmen who get engaged in inappropriate extramarital behavior. So yeah, very, very good point. There's more to this discussion, but I do want to, as we kind of finish out the hour here, I want to start moving into this discussion of the 6 canons of conservative thought. I've talked about this at great length in the past, but it's, I think, more poignant than ever. As politics becomes more and more personality driven, we find ourselves, I think, enticed to step away from principles in order to support a personality, instead of finding a personality who will clearly articulate, stand up for, and do whatever they can to implement proper principles. For example, over the weekend or earlier this week, whatever it was, I don't know, Donald Trump was at a rally, and he makes a statement, something along the lines about the way people are talking about Supreme Court justices. And he says something along the lines, it should be illegal for them to talk this way. These people should be in jail, something like that. I don't remember the exact quote. Now, I don't think for a second that he was serious about that. Just to be clear, this isn't Donald Trump saying that you should be thrown in jail for the things you say. No more than, I had Indian food at an Indian restaurant at the Star of India a couple of weeks back, and I said that food was so good it should be illegal. I wasn't asking for Congress or the city of Little Rock to outlaw or ban the Star of India's chicken tikka masala. That's absurd and ridiculous. It's a figure of speech. It's so good it should be illegal. It's like there's a cookie recipe out there that called better than sex cookies. I'm sure they're good. They're not that good. It's a figure of speech. And so I'm quite convinced Donald Trump was making a just to be clear, a figure of speech kind of statement there. But that, of course, gets picked up by every news media outlet in the country, and Donald Trump wants to throw people in jail and blah blah blah, and then we find ourselves starting to defend. Well, yeah, it should be illegal to say that about judges because judges are put in a position where they have to do these hard things and make hard decisions, and we start defending a bad policy because of what a personality said. We start defending something that is antithetical to our principles because a personality or a person that we like or agree with has made some comment, or because a personality or a person that we like or appreciate has said something that enraged the people that we don't like. And so we find ourselves in a position where we feel like we have to defend it, even though it might be outrageous, or even though there's no need to defend it because it wasn't ever actually said with any sort of seriousness, because we've abandoned principles. And we have in general in politics, we have embraced personality over principle. And so I want to take a little bit of time today and talk about the principles that have been laid out by some of the greatest conservative thinkers of the last 200 years. The men who have sat down and developed ideologies and policy foundational principles to guide us in how we govern, in how we approach governance in general. And so again, please don't hear me. I'm not trying to make this about Donald Trump or anything like that. It was just the example that I could think of off the top of my head. Nobody on either side actually believes that Donald Trump wants to throw people in jail for the things they said. But because we have become so defensive of our personalities, of our people, that we end up finding ourselves attempting to defend bad principles or bad philosophies. So 501-403-KRN, 501-403-5276 is the phone number if you want to join the conversation. And to be honest, this is one of the things that I've learned about Donald Trump and the criticizing of Donald Trump. And something that I maybe even as a radio host need to apologize for. As much unfair criticism has been leveled against Donald Trump, it is easy to see how any fair criticism would be met with the same level of frustration as an unfair criticism would be. Simply because think about it, if you went to work every single day and every day you walked in, your boss asked you why you suck so bad at your job. And why are you so terrible at your job? And if my supervisor would let me, I'd fire you on the spot. If you heard that every single day as an employee, and then one day you come in, one of your coworkers just joking around, knowing that you're actually pretty good at your job, but just joking around because you made a small mistake, and your coworker says, "Gosh, why do you suck so bad at your job?" as a joke, that person is going to probably be pretty defensive of it because they're sick and tired of hearing the unfair criticism that even a fair criticism feels like an attack. So anyway, there's more to get to. We'll get into the 6 canons of conservative thought next on News Radio 1029 KRN. Welcome back once again to the Schmidt Show here on News Radio 1029 KARN. I'm your host, Brad Schmidt. Thanks for joining me this afternoon. 501-403-KARN, 501-403-5276. We're talking about the 6 canons of conservative thought and what it means to be conservative and why it matters that we follow these ideas, these principles, as opposed to personalities. And one texter says this is a kind of goes back to our discussion on the Electoral College real quick, but I want to kind of tie this together. It says the Electoral College is brilliant, texter says. I disagree with you on presidential powers, though. You cannot pick and choose what you like in the design of a republic by the founders. If in theory it works, the greed of man will ruin anything. Agreed, 100%. And that's kind of the idea behind this first canon of conservative thought is exactly that. There is this idea that the inevitability of the corruption of man affects all of this stuff. And so all I'm saying is I'm not saying that we should artificially limit the president's power or limit it more than we limit Congress or more than we limit the judicial branch, but just limit it to what the Constitution says they're supposed to do. Where we're at right now, the executive branch has stolen authority from Congress in a multitude of ways, and Congress has abdicated authority that it is supposed to have according to the Constitution to the executive branch in a multitude of ways. And what that's done is it's created this massive, overreaching, overly powerful executive branch. Like I said, the EPA, the ATF, the DEA, the FDA, the USDA, the Department of Labor, all of these agencies, all of these departments of the federal government have way more power than they were ever intended to do. We've given them all sorts of essentially legislative power because the ATF can say, we don't like a bump stock, so we're going to write a rule that says a bump stock is illegal. But that's Congress's job. The only job that the ATF has as the executive branch or part of the executive branch is to enforce the rules that Congress has set up through legislation and the executive branch has enacted by signing it into law. And the judicial branch has upheld by saying, yes, it is in line with the Constitution. The ATF's job constitutionally is not to write rules and regulations. Congress abdicated that to a multitude of government agencies by giving them the power to do that sort of thing and saying, yeah, we're going to allow them to be a quote-unquote regulatory agency, and we'll give them carte blanche to do whatever they want with regulation. And so that's all I'm talking about is we limit the power of the executive branch back to where it was originally intended to be with the according to the Constitution. So 501-403-KARN, 501-403-5276. So the to recap real quick, the first canon of conservative thought is belief in a transcendent order or body of natural law which rules society as well as conscience. And if we kind of filter everything, every law, every policy that we want to enact through that concept, is this in line with what we know to be true about reality, then we don't have to really worry too much about whether or not it will hinder liberty more than it should. If like I said, property tax is the perfect example. If we simply filtered property tax policy through this transcendent order, what we know to be true about reality is that we as humans at some point through fulfillment of contractual obligation should own our property. Then the idea of perpetual property tax goes away almost immediately, because that if it doesn't, it violates what we know to be true about reality, that we should be allowed to own that which we have worked for, that we have spent our own blood, sweat, tears, and resources for, should be ours, and no one, including the government, should be allowed to take it from us, as long as we have legally fulfilled the requirements of the contract that has led us to owning that property. And that in and of itself is, like I said, a perfect example of a law that does not adhere to the transcendent order, what we know to be true about reality. So now the second one is an interesting one too. The second canon of conservative thought, and I'll read it to you, and then we'll get into discussing it after the news. But the second canon of conservative thought is an affection for the proliferating variety and mystery of human existence, as opposed to the narrowing uniformity, egalitarianism, and utilitarian aims of most radical systems. Now there's a lot of kind of big words in there: egalitarianism, utilitarian aims, all of that. But it essentially means simply acknowledging that we're all different and there is great value in those differences. There's more to get to as we continue with the Schmidt Show next on News Radio 102.9 KRN.